you today, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone to say that it's a very great pleasure for you as well to be in the midst as our guest, the Honorable Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. A brief introduction, because I'm sure you're all keen to hear from the man himself. Dr. Ralph Gonsalves is the leader of the United Labour Party, and he became Prime Minister in 2001. He has been an MP since 1994, and some of his academic background, he has studied economics. It's a little too loud. He studied economics at the University of the West Indies. He's done a master's in government, also at the University of the West Indies. And then he did a PhD in government at the University of Manchester. Incidentally, he's also a barrister who was called to Gray's Inns in 1981. PM, I have to tell you that I know you're a Gray's Inn man, but I wore my Lincoln's Inn tie today. I hope that doesn't mean that we're no longer friends.
But I feel sorry for you.
Just so that you understand, in England there are four inns, and there's all for barristers, and there's always rivalry among each other, like you have QC and bishops and saints, but these inns are very competitive in nature, the members of them. And so I'm a Lincoln's Inn member, and he is a Gray's Inn member. In 2005, he has won his first election as PM, and then in 2010. So I believe you're due for another election shortly.
My fourth term.
The PM has always been a friend of the PPP, but more importantly, he's been a friend of the cause. And so I am more than happy to welcome and take it as a privilege and an honor, and I would ask that you give him a round of applause. And before he comes to the microphone, I do also have the privilege of inviting our General Secretary, the Honorable Clement James Rohe, who has, since his assumption of General Secretary for our party, has initiated a process that has transformed the necessary transformation, I should say, that was so badly desired since our electoral result in 2011. No one can say that his effort and input has been anything other than positive, and we have fortified our position as being the most formidable political party that this country has ever seen. So I welcome to the microphone Comrade Clement James Rohe.
The exchange of views between the two comrades in terms of Gray's Inn and Lincoln's Inn and membership struck me. I'm neither a member of either of those inns, but I remember the PPP. And at least the PPP was able to bring two inns together. Once there's no one that is out, and everybody is in. And that's what the PPP is all about. Inclusivity. All of us are part of this exciting journey which we are embarked upon. The port of destination is Port Wayne elections on May the 11th. That's the port that we're heading for. And the young professionals who are part of the team that is heading, the crew, sorry, of which Comrade Ramatar is the captain, is headed for a final destination on May the 11th to win these elections. Dr. Gonzalez, or Comrade Ralph, as we would call him in the more informal party terms, is a long-standing friend of the People's Progressive Party, a long-standing friend of Dr. Chedi Jagan, and he can sit for hours and talk to you about his conversations with Dr. Jagan. And I think later on in the day, he probably will do more of that. But today, we've decided to invite him, and he's gracefully accepted our invitation to speak to you, to reflect on some of his political experiences and to talk about issues that are of a choice to him. And without any further ado, I'd like to invite Comrade Ralph to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my comrade chairman and Clement and all the comrades who are here. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here at Red House. And I also want to thank you especially for even thinking that I have something important to say. After all, you all are very busy with the elections just a few weeks away. And I hope what I have to say today can probably help. I want to talk a little bit about my own political experiences, my own journey, and electoral preparation. And what are we fighting for? First of all, it is important that you begin with a sense of self-mastery. And to begin with a sense of self-mastery, you have to first of all satisfy yourself about an important question as to who you are, from whence you have come, and where do you intend to go. There'd be a lot of things written about all of these subjects, but the most fundamental, in my view, is a simple proposition. You're not better than anybody else, and nobody else is better than you. It doesn't matter what are your circumstances, what are your origins, from whence you have come. You are not better than anybody else, and nobody else is better than you. So you have that self-confidence combined with the respect for your own self and for other people. And to master, the quest to master yourself in individual terms is to recognize that that is not possible without you being part of a wider collective. Maybe the apotheosis of the self-reliant man, the man who wanted to master for himself alone, was Howard Hughes, quite an eccentric billionaire. He was so absorbed with himself that he became an atomized individual by himself, to the point where he trusted no one. He was not part of any collective, save and except those whom he purchased and used and abused according to his whims. Your self-mastery has to be your interconnection, as Chedi used to say, and as the Marxists say, the dialectical relationship between yourself and the collective. And of course, there are contradictions between them which have to be resolved. And they feed into one another and assist one another. that sense of individual and collective self-mastery is important to build yourself, build your family, build your nation, and build your civilization. And I begin from the individual, and I will go very swiftly to the collectivity of the nation. Our Caribbean civilization, of which the Guyanese dimension is a magnificent part. This civilization is unique. It has its own legitimacy. It has its own history. And it has its own trajectory for further ennoblement. And the central political institution which arises out of the civilization or the various components is the state. And the state, though not the only institution to help to mold the civilization, the state is critical. And it is important that persons with particular philosophy, vision, programs, policies, to be in charge of the state, to assist with this self-mastery, and for us to act in the interest of our own humanization. All of these things you would read in several books. We're trying to distill all of it in a succinct way to carry important messages. Now, there are some people who may say, well, the challenges of government are such that after being in office and being in command of the state apparatus for 23 years, maybe it's always a good thing to take a rest and come back because the challenges are so immense. I want to tell you from a man who has been in the wilderness for a long, long time before I came to office. If you think government is difficult, try opposition. So you will hear from time to time that kind of a talk. If you think that government is difficult and challenging, try opposition. No. This year, in October, would be 47 years since I'm a political activist. And I have contested every single general election in my country since independence in 1979. In August, I'm going to be 69 years old. The average lifespan of a Vincentian male is 74. Therefore, if the averages are played. But I always, when my opponents look forward in anticipation, hopefully to my demise in respect of the averages, I remind them that my mother just celebrated her 95th birthday. So I still have some juice left in me. Now, I have arrived at the position where I am through a host of circumstances. Some of them were not propitious. When I was born, in 1946, I was born in the back room of the downstairs of a building where my father and mother had been given a lodging. My father had been thrown off from a hall and chamber estate house where he was a watchman. I went to school, primary school, barefooted for all the years, from the time I'm 5 to when I was 12 plus. When I was selected, and in those days you had to be selected to write the grammar school exam, which took in 30 boys. Colonialism is amazing. They did so little, but yet somehow they were successful in giving the projection that they did so much. Colonialism was around since 1763, British colonialism in my country. And by the time I went to secondary school, it was almost 200 years of colonialism. I went to secondary school in January 1959. And in those 200 years, they had built 2 secondary schools, one for boys and one for girls, one for each 100 years of colonialism. And there are people who will tell you, oh, they did such a magnificent job to get these 2 schools up and running. But I who opened 10 in my first 9 years, let's say, I opened so many that I dilute secondary education. How dare me open schools so that everybody can go? I'm sure you have this kind of dialogue taking place among certain bourgeois circles and those infused with the incubus of colonialism. Incubus is a lovely word, I-N-C-U-B-U-S. It means the evil spirit, the incubus of colonialism. And the chances which you get are so important in life that you must take them. And don't take for granted your membership inside of a mass party like the PPP. Or indeed, with Lincoln's in. Don't take as happenstance the fact that you are on a list to become a member of parliament. When I was the only boy selected from my school to write the grammar school exam, about 300 boys across the whole country, and only 30 can get in. So you're competing not only against the examiner, but against your colleagues. And when they told my mother, she was overjoyed. Come from deep country, never wear a hard shoe in my life. The only thing that I had was those old canvas soft mash when the bishop comes by. I used to go to church barefoot, but when the bishop came by, you can't really go and let the bishop give you the benediction if you're barefoot. You have to put on your soft mash, your canvas soft shoe. So my mother decided that she, so proud, she will go and get her boy a pair of shoes. Of course, the idea of I being able to go to town with my mother to buy a shoe is just completely out of order in those days. So she measured my foot with a piece of string. Of course, a string is not the best instrument with which to measure your foot, because it creates a difficulty when the actual measurement is taking place, and then the application of that piece of measurement to the shoe itself is problematic. She brought it back with a half size too small. So on examination day, I had a real problem. I had to go to town. And I had to walk from where the bus left me a good 200, 250 yards, maybe a quarter mile to where the exam center was. This artifact that I had on my foot was an encumbrance because I had been wholly unaccustomed to such a device. And secondly, because it was squeezing my foot, I was walking as though I had tobo. You know what tobo is? Tobo is when you have particular foot injury in the old days, and you have the jigger in your foot, and so on and so forth. When the exam paper was being handed out, the first one, I had the presence of mind to take off my shoe because it was squeezing me too much under the desk. And I wrote my exam the way I had written all examinations hitherto, barefooted. And that important decision at that point made the difference between me ending up being a banana farmer and being on the road to be a professional and to end up as Prime Minister. Opportunities, and you take advantage of them and understand the significance. My father had left school at class 3 in the primary school at age 10 to go and work on jogging our route on an estate. My mother left at class 6. My mom especially was so excited about me going to school. My father, it didn't really matter him. If I didn't do it, I'll go and work in the fields. And over the years, I realized that I'm not better than anybody, and nobody better than me. And that I am responsible to a large extent for who or what I am, but only in the context of the collective. Now, where is the collective important? I'll give an example. I finished secondary school. I did fairly well. God had blessed my head. And in addition to all my wayward ways, I was disciplined in my studies. And if you're a student, you have to be disciplined in your studies. You can do all sorts of other things. It's an obligation. I wouldn't have been able to go to any university outside. There was the University of West Indies. How did the University of West Indies come about? In the 1930s, there were anti-colonial uprisings throughout the region. The British government sent a commission under Lord Moyne, known as the famous Moyne Commission, which reported after the war, because things were so bad that it was feared that if they published the report during the war, Hitler will use it as a propaganda weapon as to how Britain is treating the colonies. The nationalist leaders in the anti-colonial uprisings had as one of their demands the building of a regional university. The people who followed them, the bulk of them never finished primary school, like my father, and like his older brother, who was one of the local leaders in the anti-colonial uprising in our part of the country. But they knew that education was an important passport to development and out of poverty. And they supported their national leaders. They supported this demand, so that after the war, the university was set up as a University College of London in 1948. And 18 years later, I went to that university. Had the people not supported their nationalist leaders, and had the nationalist leaders not the foresight to see this, I, who was not yet born when that demand was made, would not have been a beneficiary. So that those who go to the University of the West Indies, or go to the University of Guyana, or any university for that matter, you can't take it for granted. And those who think that it is because they are bright, why they went to Lincoln's, went to University of the West Indies, well, you're fooling yourself. Because there are a lot of people before me who were very bright, who never got a chance. And the chance came about for the improvement of yourself and for a greater sense of self-mastery because of opportunities which had been made available by persons who had gone before. So that when you finish your university education, as many of you have done, or are about to go, or your professional work, and you think now that all you need to do is, as quickly as possible, to get your SUV, to get your house, of course, expected you'll get a spouse. But you damn everything which has happened, and that you are now an individual, qua individual, individual as individual, and you become an atomized individual. You ain't going nowhere. And then you sit down after you've worked during the day and go to a place called 704 and you drink, and while you are there you expatiate on every single problem, that you have all the facile solutions, but you don't intend to be engaged. Because politics is a dirty business. You got no time with that. All of them are the same. Well, that is a kind of cynicism and nihilism, a kind of nothingness, which would leave you empty. I know some of you will say, no, I will not be empty. I don't have to go to 704. I will become a Pentecostal and an evangelical Christian. I'm perfectly in order for you to do that. But read carefully the letters of Paul, and you will see how engaged he was to ensure that there was an improvement in people's lives, and how collective action by him was necessary. And how in his bifurcated society he emphasized that he had come to move away. In fact, Christ had come to move away from the Mosaic covenant of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and the law, and to go for something very uplifting, a thing called grace, but it's part of the human upliftment. And importantly, Paul had come to preach to a united people, Jews and Gentiles. So if you think that you even become an evangelical or a Pentecostal or whatever religion, and that the obligation on you is political quietism, that very political quietism is a form of politics, because you take anything which goes. And what goes if good and decent people don't get involved is that you allow monopoly capitalism and the hegemony in the present imperial world to continue without any changes. So you have to be engaged. Now, the journey is never easy. I don't know if any of you, if you have here a copy of the Western Trial. If you have a copy, anybody. I want you to read the last line. This is, Chetty wrote that postscript, that epilogue, in 1975. The book was published in 1966. And then there was a second and a third edition. And this one was written in 1975. He would have been in the opposition for 14 years. After there was a conspiracy with the American imperialists, the British colonialists, and local forces. And I have to, even though while I'm inside of here, I have to speak to prepare myself when I talk this evening, so I don't appear as though I am taking any side with anybody. So I keep my language fairly careful. And he saw the prospects ahead challenging, difficult. Despite 11 years of real pressure, his last line, he said, history and time are on our side. We will win. Huh? Well, from 75, it took another 17 years before it won. 28 years in the wilderness. And you have to study his wilderness experiences so that you can appreciate what you have and what you need to build upon. You have to study the wilderness years. The same way you study the wilderness years of Isaiah and Jeremiah and the prophet builder Nehemiah and Paul himself. You study them. You have to study the wilderness years of Jagan. You have to study the wilderness years of Chetty. Because it's an exceptional set of people to have survived those wilderness years and to create something better. Better but not perfect. Any of you who think that this side of eternity you're going to have perfection, you're fooling yourself. Not going to have perfection this side of eternity. What you have to do is to look around, see what you are committed to, and the progress you are making towards that. Because get me this. To climb a mountain, this is why some of the facile discussion at 704 and on Facebook, after you've gone to 704, and you're filled with spirit, not of the Lord, but of another kind. You want to vent your spleen. And you're talking as though you can climb a mountain by way of a straight line. It is true that the shortest distance between 2 points geometrically is a straight line. But you can't cross a mountain in a straight line. You have to make zigs, you have to make zags. And as you're doing your zigzag, what is always in your head is, how can I most efficaciously make my way to the mountaintop? You will hear a lot of false prophets. Some of them who were with Chedi. But it is not the first time that somebody who is with you would leave. Christ had the most selective party in the world. The Jesus Christ party. He select 12. Huh? He select 12. And there's a man who handpicked them well. He look for very good criteria. He was the first man when any dispute, he invoked democratic centralism. He said, listen, I am the truth, I am the light and the way. You follow me. I tell you, you follow this thing. You hear me? He had the best selective criteria. He was good with democratic centralism. In fact, Lenin must have modeled the Bolsheviks off the teachings of Christ and his organizational apparatus, and applied by Paul, servant of the Lord called to be an apostle. But even with such a selective set of criteria and from persons, you get it wrong with one. 1/12, fellow named Judas. So don't feel away when you have thousands and you have 2 or 3 who go on astray. You have a better proportion than Christ himself. You hear me? That's the reality. And those who will tell you that they are the true followers of Chedi. Well, you had those too, you know. They call them the Gnostics. You know why they call them the Gnostics? Not agnostics, you know, the Gnostics. Because they were the fount of all knowledge. They knew every single thing about every subject, and nobody else can question them. And especially they spoke a lot about themselves and what they have done and their goodness and how extraordinary they are, without realizing one simple thing. In their frame, the knowledge, the only person who has all the knowledge is God. And in the case of the politics, the knowledge is distilled through the wisdom of the people. And you apply your heart to wisdom. That's how you had to battle against the Gnostics. And if you think, I know what I'm talking about, read Paul's letter to the Philippians. Read it, and you'll see the struggle against the Gnostics. the all-knowing individuals, the facile solutions, the straight line in climbing Mount Roraima. Well, never happened that way. Now, when you're in office for 23 years, and I see it in office where I am for 14 years, people will grumble. Some of your own will complain. What is your job? Is to make sure that the grumbling and the complaining do not metamorphose, do not solidify into a general dissatisfaction. People will have complaints. People will have grumbles. In my case, I would find examples that a family of 5 never had anybody walking in there. The mother and the father walking now. The first boy who had finished school by the time I come, walking, get work. And the last 2, I get them off to university. And they're happy. I even help them with a low-income house. But if they want to put an addition on, and they don't get some galvanized and cement to help them to put galvan, they stay in home. So, who they punishing? They're punishing themselves. Because if they think the other fellas in St. Vincent can give them that, well, first of all, they don't have the program I have in education, they don't have the program I have in housing. And then you will meet some people. So you have to make sure that the grumbling and complaining, you have to explain it so that it doesn't solidify or metamorphose into a generalized dissatisfaction. But you will meet some people as you go about. Some people whom dissatisfaction is their permanent lot. They are just dissatisfied by nature. They are fickle. They place a lot of store on avarice and greed. And their demands are insatiable. And they are permanently dissatisfied. For those, you leave them to the Lord. So what can you do? It's the nature of life. But you make sure that those who are straying, that we bring them and we bring out our base. And you have to be disciplined. I'll tell you this. In my journey, I told my comrades last night as we were talking and joking. In the old days, 30-something years ago, 40 years ago, a small political party. On the Thursday night, we will decide that we go in to hold a public meeting in a rural community on, say, the Saturday evening. I had an old Cortina car. The trunk was big, could take the 4 funnel horns. Steering wheel, tough like a truck. Big 12-volt battery. I have my amplifier and I have my microphone in the car. I will arrive at the scene and I will set up myself. Because you have to do all kind of tasks. And I'll wait half an hour, and none of the other fellas turn up. On Thursday night, they were turning up. You don't have cell phone in those days to contact them. When you finally get them the next day, or 2 days later, whatever, the girlfriend did take the car, or something did happen and so on. They didn't have the fire inside of their belly. They didn't have that commitment to get the work done. And I will stand up and I will be the chairman. I will say the opening prayer. I'll be the first speaker. I'll be the second speaker. I will be the third speaker. I will be the last speaker. And I will then finally give the benediction. I will talk sometimes for 3 hours or more on practically every subject under the sun. I've been in hostile places already, where as soon as I go into the cul-de-sac, the people come off the street. The bars close. They turn out the light, turn off their lights. I have spoken to audiences consisting of a fat woman, an old man, and a dog, with the dog being the most attentive of my 3 listeners. You hear me? And I will go back again and again. And some of those areas are the strongest areas for me. And when I go among them now, they say, comrade, you remember when nobody wanted to follow you? From the beginning I was there. I said, yes. I allowed them to falsify the history because it doesn't matter for me not to, I accept the falsification of the history with joy and with equanimity. Broadly speaking, the overwhelming majority of people would listen to you and give you a hearing. Some will chase you, and you thank them for the time. You don't get vexed with them. You don't curse them. You have a pleasant disposition, which means you have to make sure that you're hungry, because if you're hungry, you're likely to be on edge, and you must drink your water, and you must feel yourself calm, and so on and so forth, and just do your work in accordance with the training which I know you have received. This evening, I will talk about one of the central formulations of Jagan, of Chedi. I hear people talk about unity in the abstract. Unity. Chedi wanted unity. Of course. But Chedi always made the point that there are 2 dialectical propositions which have to be, you have to write them in tandem. Unity and struggle. You unite with people as far as it is humanly practicable on the issues where they coincide with you, with your perspective. And you struggle against those tendencies, even among persons with whom you unite, where they want to be anti-democratic, anti-national, or making unjustifiable and unnecessary accommodations to imperialism. Unity in the abstract can't mean anything. It has to be unity and struggle, and in the concrete, in the actual circumstances. And you always have to remember the principles, because the application of those principles may give you a different result in different circumstances. You can't take what happened, what Chedi would have done in a particular situation 40 years ago and say, well, he called for A and B, and transpose the result of that call to today, what you have to do is to apply the principles which he held aloft to the factual situation. The other way of just a mechanistic, abstract unity is surely unscientific, impractical, unrealistic. It has always to be grounded. And great men make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them so to make. You can't make it in a vacuum. You have to study the real and actual conditions and apply the principles to the actual situation. As how you apply any set of scientific principles. The result of Archimedes' principle relating to the displacement of water when you put in a particular object. Well, if you put in a small object, it ain't going to displace a whole set of water. But if you throw a tank in a pond, the water would rise above the level of the pond. So you would say, there was a support for the throwing of objects in a pond to have the water rise and to get it above. Well, it's a tank you throw in. Always the physical circumstances. And you have to understand when the things change. You heat water. Somebody say, well, you see the water hot and boiling. That's fine. You heat it. But if it reaches 100 degrees centigrade, it is transformed from water to steam, an entirely different product altogether. I return to the point, you have to apply the principles in every single given context. And the application of the principles is what is important for the party and the persons involved with the party through discussion to come to the conclusions. I don't know about you, but I'm a man, I love elections. There's some politicians who don't like elections. I love elections. And when I go to elections, as I will go to one sometime between now and March, I prepare everything about myself. Even in relation to my mobility. From May last year, I know I'm going to have elections before the end of this year. I went on a discipline program. I love good and sweet food. But too much of it is inconsistent with my political work. I lost 55 pounds over the past, from May last year. Because I have a lot of work to do. You have to prepare yourself mentally. You have to prepare yourself. You have to read the documentation. You have to study what you're going to do. Inside of the PPP, your objective between now and then is to make sure the PPP win the election. And you have to use all your skills in so doing. I knew Chedi very well. Chedi used to treat me if I were his son. He'd come and stay with me, I would stay with him, come to Guyana. I spoke on platforms with Chedi in Guyana outside of election time. "38 years ago, long before any of you were ever in the contemplation of being conceived. I addressed the GAU conference at Enmore. And I watched the PPP when Chedi came back, and then Janet, and then Bharat, and Donald. And look, the period since 1992, make no bones about it, has been an extremely difficult period in world history. When Chedi came into office in 1992, the Soviet Union had already imploded. So for instance, Chedi's formulations relating to the non-capitalist path and the role of nationalization in it, and the kinds of relations which could be existing with the former Soviet Union, technology and assistance of one kind or the other, that was not available. So you had to make different tacks. And then the same thing with Janet, and then Bharat, and world capitalism has had a series of crises. And the US triumphant, but yet in its triumphalism, doing a lot of crazy things all over the world. Globalization has come upon us. We had to readjust our workforce and how we move. There's a global economic crisis from 2008 and continuing, which Guyana has withstood fairly well, because it is an economy based significantly on production of goods rather than services. The tourism economies, for instance, of Barbados and Antigua and St. Kitts, or even St. Vincent and Grenadines to a lesser extent, St. Lucia, suffered and still suffering because there are different conditions, and you have to readjust yourself and do things. Because if you don't, you will become a dinosaur. But it doesn't mean because you take a zig and a zag that you ain't coming to the mountaintop. And you're doing a series of people-oriented things to advance your country and the development. One final thing. When I was a boy, there was an old man who lived in my village. Still see him, Mr. Doyle. Poor as a church mouse, dignified black man, tall, slight beard, all white, hair white. He had gone to Cuba to cut cane during the Machado regime, which was at the time of the World Economic Depression, 1928, 1929. Spent a few years, he came back poor. He used to be seen as an eccentric, but he and I struck up a good relationship, and I would sit with him on the wall. Could still see him in his flip-flops, his gunslingers they call them, his black pants, his white see-through shirt, which was once white but was now largely brown, and a merino. And one day, There's a young man in his 20s, just getting out a lot of ridiculous things in the road. And Mr. Doyle said to me, Ralph, look at him. He's at war with himself. He said, you know, in each of us there's positive and there's negative. And they fight one another. And he said, one wins out, you know. I said, well, which one wins? He said, the one you feed. If you feed the negative, it will win. If you feed the positive, that is the one which will win. That is the optimism reminiscent of Chedi. And that is the basis for your sense of self-mastery and for progress. And that is what you have to have in yourself. That no one, you're not better than anyone, but no one is better than you. And do not be kerfuffled. Do not be blown off course by a number of people who, like the Gnostics, some of them quite educated, involve themselves in what I call learned helplessness. They can tell you everything which is wrong. What is taking place in St. Vincent or here. But ask them for credible solutions. They have none. They give virtually incantations to the negative. And there's nothing positive. You, young people, have a tremendous responsibility. I spend a lot of time with young people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I wanted to leave as party leader for this election, but the executive of the party convinced me that I had to stay to do a fourth consecutive 5-year term. I'm told that at the moment I am the longest serving continuous leader in the Caribbean. And the reason why I gave in to the guys, I was going to stay and still run in my constituency and help whoever is my successor. But I accepted when they told me that of the youngsters whom we are grooming to come along, maybe we need to make a further assessment as to which one or two we should choose from to carry forward the work. And that is part of my obligation. And as I say, as I tell the electorate in St. Vincent, and you could adopt it here too, the song, the words of the hymn writer, Lord, let me not leave behind any unfinished task. And of course, even persons like myself from the roots that I have come, even I have a little vanity, and don't mind a little vanity, because on my own, I tell my party and I tell the electorate, I know because of the years that I've been along in this business, when I die, I will be given a state funeral. I just ask the people to do me one favor. Not to allow the hypocrites to be in charge of the government when they give me the state funeral. I want my tribe to be in charge, my political outfit, so they can crown me with red roses, red being my party color. Well, I couldn't wear red today because you know how it goes. I have to come in neutral white. I wish you all the best, and I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you very much.
PM, we know that you couldn't wear red, but we took the liberty of garlanding you with some red. Yes. Notice the two other garlands don't have any other red on it, because we know.
This one is the opposition color.
That's why I took it off. That's why I took it off. And we know that you love elections, because we saw the video on YouTube where the announcement for the date of elections in 2010 was made. It was December 15th? Yes. December 15th. And PM on stage in front of his cheering mass, he took out a calendar. And when he took out the calendar, he started to circle dates. And in doing so, he said, I'm only allowed to give a minimum of 10 days. So I'm going to count this with you. From nomination day. And I'm going to count this with you. And he said, when he reached to Saturday, which was the 9th day, he said, well, we can't go on Sunday because we have to go to church. But be very sure I am not going to give them one extra day of not going to elections, because I love elections and we're going to win the elections. We are about to open the floor for some discussions. But I do have a couple of comments and a couple of quick questions as well. Actually, just one quick question. There is a particular reason why you are addressing this young crowd. And it's a young crowd of very distinguished and professional outfits. And there's a reason for that. It's because our party has also recognized that salient point that you made at the very end about the transition and the molding of young leadership, which is a key indice of any credible leadership. And in doing that, you are able to address some of the young minds of our party that will help to shape not only our party, but the future of our country. And so our first question, or my first question, which I'd like to open the floor in relation to this. You spoke at length about what we're fighting for. And if I am not mistaken, you said that in essence, it is a fight that is bigger than ourselves. It is a fight that is about the future, and it's about the future of your generation. And that we cannot ignore the past. But I have noticed a very distasteful trend that is happening not only in our country but around the world, that politics and public life is now becoming a very unwelcome place. So for the ones that are interested in national development, as all of you are, there is a lot of feral and visceral attacks on any attempt to enter the realm of politics. And if you have been paying attention to what's been happening during the election, especially as of recent, with the announcement of candidates, you would see exactly what I'm talking about. And so if you think that you're going to enter politics and believe that there is going to be a rosy and comfort bed waiting for you, then you need to think again. But my question is really in relation to young people entering politics and how unwelcome the distasteful event that I was mentioning a moment ago is, how unwelcome public life and politics has become, especially for the ones that are interested in national development, and they know the only way that they can do it is through political life. So what advice would you give to young people?
When young people enter the process, understand this, that the other side would wish if they had you as a young person being involved in the process with them. That's the first thing. So that the attack on you is not so much for your involvement, is that you're involved not with them, but with the other side. The second thing is that there are some people who are so antithetical to young people getting involved in anything that they want to wait until you're virtually walking with a walking stick and dentures, and when you talk, your teeth clacking. Those are dinosaurs, and we just have to face the fact that young people come into an organization, enriches and invigorates the organization. William Wordsworth, towards the end of the 18th century, the time of the French Revolution, said something which is apt in these circumstances. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Youthfulness is a heavenly condition, though it is blissful for me to be alive rather than dead. Though it is, of course, and pastors will tell you that, despite the fact that they will tell you that they are ready to meet the Savior, but none want to be hastened to it. Even though they are certain that it is better there. It's a better place. It always strikes me as strange that though it's a better place there, they want to stay here as long as possible. But that's one of the contradictions in life. So, youthfulness is something heavenly. But let us look at achievements of young people. Pitt the Younger, William Pitt the Younger, was Prime Minister by 24, before 24. The philosopher Descartes, by the time he was 26, had devised a new philosophy of the universe. Revolutionary philosophy. Not in the way Marx was revolutionary, but revolutionary in terms of the conceptions and the ideas used in philosophical discourse. Napoleon Bonaparte was in his 20s when he took on the streets of Paris those who wanted to subvert the French Revolution. Never minded subsequently he enthroned himself as emperor. Alexander the Great was 24, 25 years when he crossed the Thebes, controlled Europe, and in fact had gone to Afghanistan. In fact, he's the only invader of Afghanistan, who was the sensible man. And he was in his 20s, his early 20s. Because when he conquered what is now Kabul and the immediately surrounding areas, the guys, the warlords came from the outside, the various spaces. We're outside of Kabul. You know the warlords, they're still around. They were, since in the days of Alexander the Great, they're there. And when they came to deliver tribute, but to expect gifts from Alexander and what Alexander has to do, he summoned his war council to discuss the thing and told them, listen, let's declare victory and get out of here. And he decided, he loved boys and girls. He was both, loved men and women. He could easily have chosen a handsome young man as booty. He chose a beautiful Afghan girl. And of course, I use booty here not in the context of Rihanna or or Jay-Z's wife. Of course, if wiser and older men like Brezhnev had gone and declared victory and took an Afghan lady as booty, or George Bush had forgotten a moment his fundamental Christianism and got the permission of his wife and took one, the world would have been saved a lot of dead people. And these were people who were advised by all sorts of bright and experienced and elderly people. Alexander the Great, a young man, had seen, well, listen, this is a snake pit, and let me get out of this hellhole. Young people getting involved refresh an organization. They bring new spirit, new energy, new ideas. After my first election victory in 2001, my first convention after the victory in 2002, the theme was refresh the party. We had just won. But I had the foresight to see the importance of refreshing the party. And I refreshed the state administration. The youngest ambassador who was in Washington, I appointed her when she was 31. She didn't think she had the capacity. I told her she was the number 2. I had her as the number 2. I said I want her to be the ambassador. She says she doesn't think she can handle it. She's ready. I said, well, I'll take you home. I'll bring you home. She said, no. Do you really think? Of course. And she's doing a splendid job. My son Camilo was the youngest ambassador at the United Nations in his early 30s. He's now the foreign minister. He's 42 years old. You can do some calculation and you'll see that I did some experimentation at university. Yes. And permanent secretaries, I have them in their early 30s. You know, so what is this thing? I know that some of you are children of active politicians. And the words would be thrown at you all. Nepotism. But it is only nepotism if you do not have the capacity. If you have the capacity to serve, it is not nepotism, because why should you, by the accident of your birth, be disadvantaged from serving? In the same way that the accident of your birth should not give you preferment. The accident of your birth should not be a disadvantage. And people will make the judgment as to whether you have the capacity or don't have the capacity. They did that with Camilo when he was appointed, my son, as ambassador to the United Nations. I sent him to be interviewed by 2 hostile journalists. The journalists at the end endorsed him because the boy has capacity. The youngster has capacity. Well, what they have done now, they have shifted. They're not anymore saying that. They're saying, well, King Ralph has brought Prince Camilo to. You take these things and what is important is how do you perform on the hustings and with people as you proceed and when you do your work. In other words, you prepare well, you study well, and you do your work. I want to say this. It is extremely difficult for children of politicians to get involved in politics. In fact, I have, of my 5 children, aged between 19 and 42, only Camilo is interested in active politics. Of course, the others are interested in politics, in observing things. My second son, who is in his 30s, he was a lyricist and drummer in a rock band, whose music I would say sadly was a cross between a vehicular accident and a barroom brawl. Not exactly music that I love, but there are people who love that, hard rock. He has his own company in Oregon, doing sound engineering. He studied it. He did a master's in the field. My first daughter, 24, she's a young lawyer in the Attorney General's chambers. She has no interest in politics. She likes public policy and she debates them and she talks to me about them and so on and so forth. And argues with me about certain things. For instance, when I was socialized, to be gay meant to be happy. No, it has a different connotation, and she's at ease with these concepts in a way in which, she educates me about them, and reads and let me have a broader perspective about human rights and these things and so forth. But she's not interested in politics, in active politics. My son, Storm, who is completing his degree now at the London School of Economics. He's interested in entrepreneurship. He's not interested in politics. As an activist, though he's probably the most popular of my children. He's cool, he's easy, and how he interfaces with people. And my last daughter is about to go into veterinary school. She prefers animals to people. So, of the lot, is 20%. Well, not bad. But even for him, it's a problem. It's a difficulty, it's a challenge. Because there's always the feeling that you're getting preferment and you always have to try and do better than the next person to get, not have that charge laid at you. But don't let it weigh you down. Just do your work, and this is how I will answer you on those. In fact, I just say this. My son Storm, his dear mother got the name from No. There was a friend of hers in Guyana when her father worked here as a law reformer. And Storm Westmass, I think his name was, and that's how she got the name Storm. In fact, we ended up with my first daughter's being Isis purely by chance, because as a friend, she wanted to call her Wild after another Guyanese friend of hers, a girlfriend, and I told her that Wild is a beautiful name. It's easy to spell. It has a magnificent ring to it. I didn't say but, I didn't say however, I said and, because I have learned in life, don't oppose women. So I said, and it could just be her good fortune that when she grows up, she will fall in love and marry a man called Mr. Bull. So henceforth, she would be known as Wild Bull. And she said, you're always talking a lot of foolishness. I said, I am just saying this, I think is a good name. By breakfast time the next morning, she had satisfied herself that she might be pushing the envelope, and then she went to another friend called ISIS. And then, of course, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria came along. What are you going to do? There's nothing really which you cannot achieve with average intelligence. To study, you may have an aptitude in one area or another, and people have different aptitudes. You can study and become quite an expert in the particular field that you have set your mind to study. But which means you have to be disciplined and you have to work. And don't feel badly when you tell your mate that, look, listen, I have some work to do. I have to go and do some work with the books. I have to study. I have to this to do and so on. And you don't be a cloistered bookworm, but you have a wide set of relationships. And follow your path, but because your education and training and general development are vital, and your interaction with people. And day by day, one day at a time, sweet Jesus, you get there. And that is it. Look, when I went to University of the West Indies, my university was financed from a scholarship fund. But during the holidays, I didn't have money to feed myself. So I went to work on a truck in Jamaica, to load a truck. And I enjoyed it. I went all over the country. It certainly paid more than working as a reporter at the Gleaner newspaper. And I wanted the money. And I did that. And in England, I work as a construction worker. I work selling double glaze and central heating equipment. I didn't know one thing about double glaze and central heating. And I know that if I could sell double glaze and central heating without knowing about them, that I could sell my ideas, which I know a lot about. So you just do things, and you're not ashamed, and you just work. And you're in your party groups, and you're doing your thing, and you work with your family, you build your family links, you're not at war with your neighbors, you're not at war with your family, and just be disciplined and good. I mean, and it's as simple. And because, believe me, though it might seem difficult, you will reach my age, God's willing, one of these days. That's a fact of life. You have to say that you are the change. You are the change. That the party has set itself on a course to refresh itself with personnel and ideas. And it is evident from your list and from the policies that you are presenting that they are not sterile policies of a nature which would look at the old things and just simply continue them. One of the things, for instance, Barrett and I were along with each other for quite a while. And we were very good friends. And as always, you know, I have lots of anecdotes, and if you meet him, you would tell him this one, and I'm coming to Barrett just now, because you've been here for so long that I have to also entertain you in order to keep your interest. I also have a pressing engagement. And in 2003, in the 30th anniversary of CARICOM, my daughter Isis was 13 years old. And my dear friends, Owen Arthur, who was by then a single man, and Barrett, by then also a single man, they had a fantastic event. P.J. Patterson had put it on in Montego Bay, Rose Hall, Montego Bay. But I had not observed Barrett and Owen interacting with all these lovely ladies. But my daughter obviously had. So we were sitting together, I had taken her with me, and Barrett called me. So I went over to him. And she followed, because she saw them whispering with one another, and she followed. And as he was about to talk to me, she blurted out at him. She said, "President Jackdale, why do you want to lead my daddy astray?" She said, "Isis, Uncle Barrett wouldn't do that." And then, of course, she became very good friends with Isis. I want to say with Barrett, and I developed a very good friendship from early. Because you'd have been a much younger person than me when I was coming in Guyana and with Chedi and John, and you'd have heard about me. But Barrett set Guyana on a creative course. And obviously, the people of Guyana thought so. That's why they validated him in the various elections in which he contested. And he would seek to get the small things right. But he realized that you can't develop a country like Guyana, or indeed St. Vincent and the Grenadines, just with incrementalism and a sterile pragmatism. You have to take large leaps of faith to get things done and to work properly to implement. And sometimes you don't get it 100% right. I'll tell you this, talking the truth always helps. Always helps. And people see it, and they recognize it. Thanks.